care who I have to work with. I'll work with a Republican. I'll work with a Democrat. I'll work with an independent. I believe in finding common ground, not burning bridges or holding grudges. I believe that little victories lead to bigger ones once trust has been established. Folks who I'm not in total alignment with are not my enemy. And I'm going to walk in with that mindset.
Welcome to Set the Table, a show where we bring together everyday people from opposite sides of the cultural and political aisle for kind conversations about tough topics. I'm your host, Peace Ike. In a world where shouting matches have replaced dialogue, we're creating something different, something human. For the past several years, I've been gathering complete strangers around dinner tables to talk about race, religion, politics, you name it. Now we're bringing those conversations to you, alongside insights from thought leaders and curious minds who are making sense of our divided world and showing us a better way to engage it. So pull up a chair. There's room for you at the table. Welcome back to the Set the Table podcast, and today I'm excited to introduce you to a special guest by the name of Ervin Olson, who brings a very rare thoughtfulness to the conversation around faith and public engagement. Now, Ervin is a lifelong Chicagoland resident with a background in journalism and over a decade of experience in tech project management. After the 2008 financial crisis shifted his career path, he transitioned from investigative journalism into building a career in technology brick by brick. His passion for civic issues, particularly food insecurity, affordable housing, and the value of life, remains central. So outside of his work, Ervin volunteers with World Relief Chicagoland, New Community Outreach, and One Northside, staying rooted in community injustice. Now, Ervin is a Christ follower who is not afraid to wrestle with the tension between politics and personal conviction, and he doesn't shy away from complexity. In this episode, we talk about the state of our world, the roots of our division, and what it means to stay rooted in what you believe in, even when culture feels off balance. You'll also hear about a political decision he has made to run for office and the deeper values that led him there. But the details of that decision just might surprise some of you once you learn a little bit more about him. So let's get into it. Ervin, thank you so much for being with us today. I am really, really excited for what I believe is going to be a very compelling conversation.
No, thank you, Peace, for having me on. I really appreciate this opportunity to connect and share here.
Likewise. Now, Ervin, we've never met until today, but my sister connected us, and she was really adamant that you were someone I had to talk to, someone I had to interview. So I hunted you down out of the blue, and you were like, who is this strange woman who is showing up in my inbox asking to talk to me? But can you help the listener know how you even became connected to my sister, or how we even got connected?
Yeah, that's a great story. So my wife and your sister started attending the same ministry school in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, called Global Awakening. And they actually just graduated second year last month in May. And this was a decision that my wife and I did not take lightly. I think the ball started to roll around September of 2022. My wife is a trauma therapist, and she started to feel some discontent, I think, with just being like a full-time therapist, and we were struggling to find a church home as well at the time. And so there's like that combating like mental health ministry, just wanting to kind of sew back into your community, but not having a place to do it. 2 weeks prior to making a decision to pursue Global Awakening, I had heard from God, and his words were, just let her go. And sometimes God doesn't give you context. So that was a bit alarming at first, us being married at that time, about a little over 2 years in. So we had just completed a couples counseling session, 2 weeks later. And the following morning, my wife and I were just having a discussion in the kitchen, and she randomly brought up wanting to attend Global Awakening, which again is in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. We live in Chicago. And that's when I shared what I had heard from God, just let her go. now it made sense. And that's where we started to kind of pursue this opportunity. So my wife and I, we ended up doing 2 years of long distance marriage throughout the program, which was
Wow.
challenging in itself. Now that the program's over, we're back living under one roof for the first time, pretty basically about 18 to 24 months.
Wow.
We're in the process of reconnecting and kind of dating again.
Mm.
But this was a door that Jessica had to walk through. She would not have made the connections. She would have never met your sister. She would have met so many amazing people that she's had to be able to build relationships at Global. And this is kind of where we're at. And
Yeah.
that's the long story. That's the long version of how Jessica met your sister.
Mm. Wow. I'm sure you could advise a lot of couples on a lot of things based on what you and Jessica have walked through these last 2 years. I can't imagine that was easy, but I'm sure you've gained some valuable wisdom on how to love well. Yeah.
Mhm.
So you have worn a few hats, as I mentioned in my intro: journalism, civic services, volunteerism, and now you're in the tech world. But I understand that you desire to go back into journalism. What has really spurred that desire for you?
Hmm, that's a great question. I think initially I had received my bachelor's degree in journalism from Lewis University, and this goes all the way back to 2009. And within that time, we were coming off the recession, we had the financial crisis. We've had the growing student loan debt issue, which is coming to fruition today. It's just like these issues that I feel like were not being dealt with in Washington with um, meaningful legislation. We're just putting a band-aid on a stab wound.
Mm,
And to see what journalism has become, it kind of hurts my heart
mm,
uh, because I feel like now it's about how do we get the story out the quickest, as opposed to is this story even right? Have we vetted the sources?
mm,
Um, how many clicks? It's a how I experienced newspapers in the 90s. I'm 41 years old. How I experienced newspapers in the 90s is totally different than how I experience the news nowadays. Um, I think a major issue that we have, especially in America, is media literacy.
mm,
It's just there's so many sources, and I use that term loosely. Um, Anybody could post. Anybody could post in social media. Anybody could post a blog that could be shared. Anybody could slap a Bible verse on something and make it sound Christian. Literally anybody can. And we live in a culture that we want to read what we agree with and we want to hear what makes us feel good.
mm. Yes.
And we need to bring back, I think it's twofold: hard hitting investigative journalism
Yes.
that does not run with the spirit of fear.
Hmm.
And we need to reinvest in hyperlocal journalism. I think
Mm.
it's journalism on a domestic scale, but also hyperlocal, more community focused. I think you get in these smaller communities and they get wrapped up into what's going on in Washington and even the state capitals that are getting wrapped up into what's going on halfway across the world
Yeah.
when there is policy in Washington that is being implemented that will directly affect them and they're not hearing about it. So they're getting sucked into this larger orbit.
Yeah.
Um, that has contributed to so much of where we're at politically, as well as I feel like within the church in America.
Wow. Yeah. You said so much there, but yeah, there is this, it's certainly operating in a spirit of fear, but it's a an attempt to paralyze and distract, I think,
mm,
people with things that are largely out of their control,
mm,
but it but gives them a facade that they can do something about it, or that if they just get loud enough, or if they just get angry enough, or if they just, make enough noise, they can do something about it. And so it almost induces like this, exhaustion. It
mm,
exhausts people. They're using their energies in ways that aren't productive.
mhm.
Yeah. So your desire is to really change the world of journalism, make it hyper local, which I love. I've never heard that phrase before. Was it something that you coined?
I'll take credit for it. I think there was some piece of legislation that was going through maybe the House or the Senate around 2022. Um, it was around reinvesting in hyper local journalism, and it
Mm,
didn't, make any waves. I think when the most recent budget that they were passing in Washington, there were cuts to local media, but might have been NPR, which you find a lot in like rural communities. So there's going to be a lot of damage there to their ability to be able to stay connected, grassroots level.
mm. Wow. So if you step back into the journalism world, I think this is kind of a fun question, but it's also a thoughtful question, which is what news story would you cover first?
Oh boy, there's a lot to choose from. Um, gosh, you know, I would jump into the Israel and Palestine.
Mm, yeah.
Um, I don't even want to call it a conflict anymore.
Mm,
And I would cover it from the angle that I feel like it's taboo in most churches in America to pray for Palestine. Um, I think this is something that it started off as a justified response by Israel to a terrorist attack from Hamas in October of 2023. I mean, those are the facts. I personally unconditionally support Israel's right to exist as a
hmm
nation and a people, but I believe this has evolved into an ethnic cleansing in Palestine. Um,
mm,
and I support Palestine's right to exist as its own nation, contingent upon the permanent removal of all remnants of Hamas and any terrorist organization within their
mm,
government borders.
hmm.
And my angle would be that the church should be able to pray for both Jews and Palestinians.
Absolutely.
Nowhere in the Bible does it say to only pray for those who are in alignment with your views, who speak the same language as you, who look like
Yeah.
you, or who vote like you. I mean, that's just simply not biblical.
Yeah.
The people of Palestine were created in the image of God, just like the people of Israel, just like Americans and all nations across the world. And as somebody who believes in the power of prayer, I mean, what
Mhm.
really hurts my heart is to believe in the power of prayer and see that power withheld by refusing to pray for a people who were created in the image of God because of how you have been influenced through a social media or news outlet or biblical misinterpretation.
Mm, that is so well said. There's so much balance there that I think is often lost on us as certainly as Americans, certainly as Christians. But it's true that, every life matters, and grief doesn't just belong to one side.
Mm-hmm.
And the pain is running deep on both sides, no matter how you see the history. And that's also the thing, is that people are looking at the history of this conflict
Mm-hmm.
differently. Many people don't know anything about the history of the conflict, and
Yes.
yet want to be some of the loudest voices speaking out about the conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the most helpful things that we can do is to actually remain silent
Mm-hmm.
and pray when we don't know. That's becoming less and less in style these days. So, we pray for Israel. They're not perfect. We pray for Palestine because they're hurting. And I love the fact that you did highlight that, Hamas in itself is is an organization that is oppressing the people of Palestine.
Yes.
And and that is not something that the people of Palestine need to take ownership for. They are under that oppression as well.
Mhm.
So the question I always ask people is, so what is your what is your constructive solution? If you could do something, what would you do? This is the age old, conflict that seems to never go anywhere. It's always persistent. And if you look at this from eschatological lens, you can maybe say this is always going to exist. But I still am curious. I ask people, what would your solution be? So let me ask you that, Irvin. What would your solution be?
I'm no expert on the topic. I would
Hmm.
defer to Dr. Gary Burge for a better argument that I can make. But I'm familiar enough with the biblical misinterpretation of how Christian Zionism has been used to support Israel militarily. It
Hmm.
it lies with the idea that if we as a nation support Israel, God will bless America,
Hmm.
no matter what is done to the people of Palestine. Addressing that here in America deals with the financial and military support that Israel has.
Hmm.
Um, I believe we should support Israel, but not to the extent that we are today. Nor should
Hmm.
we just justify all of their actions within the region as justifiable, whether they're provoked or not. I do believe in a two-state solution. I believe, as I mentioned, Israel has a right to their land, and the same with Palestine. And I think Palestine has proven in the past that there hasn't always been war and violence. There has been times of peace. And I think we need to reflect on those times of peace and refer back to what worked then, um, and what led the Palestinian people to go back down the path of embracing Hamas
Hmm.
as a proxy government.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. They certainly didn't come to power peacefully, we'll say
Mhm.
that. So yeah, there's it's a complex issue. Um, I think that there's common ground for most people, I'll say in understanding that Hamas is a problem. And if we can quote unquote solve the problem of Hamas, I think we're one step closer to solving the problem between Israel and Palestine.
I
So
agree.
well, let's zoom back out then. And, just in general, you have a lot of complex and nuanced views, which I think is just a sign of maturity and intellect. And so I just want to kind of ask you about your values in general. What values would you say most drive your worldview?
I say there's five that jump out. One of them being equality. I carry the belief we are all created equally in the image of God.
Mhm.
Um, Personally, I rebuke, nationalistic, racial, religious, and cultural superiority.
Mm,
I think second would be altruism. I'm blessed to have been born in a country like the United States of America, which is an economic superpower. And the Bible says that our actions should not be driven by what we receive in return, but how we bless others without the expectation of a return. Um,
mm,
I don't
mhm,
operate in quid pro quos. Um, that's the basis for a lot of my work volunteering here locally in Chicago. Uh, I think third would be ethics. Um, Personally, it's just at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many zeros we have in our bank account or followers we have in social media. It's our character that builds our foundation.
mhm. Yeah,
And it is the state of our character which will determine if that foundation is on the rock or on the sand.
yeah,
If it's long lasting or if it's flippant and will break down at the first stiff wind.
yeah.
Truth. I believe our words have authority. They can speak blessing or cursing.
Mhm,
Our words can lead folks to the truth or down a darker path from the light. When I think of this, I think of a passage in First John, um, chapter 1, verse 5, that God is light and in him is no darkness at all.
mm,
And if you are knowingly or unknowingly twisting the word of God or promoting conspiracy theory or misinformation, this could be from the pulpit, could be from an email or text thread, and you are leading folks astray and you are straying away from the truth. And lastly, interdependence. The slogan that you've seen, on the side of on bumper stickers and coffee mugs is "Make America Great Again." That's been something that's been to the forefront of our culture for the better part of the last 10 years.
Hmm.
Um, I believe in interdependence. I believe that no nation can truly isolate itself from the rest of the world, um, whether it's a dome, a wall, the choices of one affect the other, and there's no running away from that global responsibility. And I believe the United States of America has a global responsibility to steward its resources for the betterment not only of its own citizens, but also to some extent those um, who simply don't have our resources, who haven't been blessed with the resources we have.
Hmm. Yeah. I think about that global responsibility, and I think oftentimes that gets conflated with globalism,
Mm-hmm.
and the two are not one and the same. I think it's a principle to help others when you can, certainly
Mm-hmm.
a Christian principle.
Yes.
So, how do we find the balance, though, between taking care of home and taking care of others? That I think tends to be where the tension lays, where people feel that there's a scarcity, right? That there's not enough to take care of your own. How do you extend to others? And I think it's a valid concern, and I wrestle with that too. So, what would you say to people who wrestle with the tension of scarcity?
I truly do believe God has given us all that we need.
Mm,
We just haven't stewarded the resources properly. I
yeah,
believe one
yeah.
of the issues that maybe one of our more polarizing issues in America is a fear of lack.
Hmm.
Um, I believe it's so easy to carry like a get mine mentality,
Yes.
and that breeds like a me first mindset where we need to control what we have as opposed to trusting God as the provider. And this mindset has led to income, healthcare, food, and housing inequality across all communities. It's urban, it's rural, it's poor, it's the dwindling middle and working class. Um, I can't help but think when I think of fear of lack, I fall back on 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 8, where it says that God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that
Mm,
having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work.
yeah.
Um, he is the provider, and we're not adhering to that command. It's almost like we don't trust that if I give a little more to this cause, to church, to if I go take $40 out of the ATM just to have some singles, so if I see some homeless folks, I have something to give. If I take that away and I give it to them, what about me? And I
Hmm.
think that's a mindset that we need to correct in our country.
Yeah. Yeah. Such good words. For sure, America is probably the most wasteful nation, food waste.
We are,
Yeah,
we
we
are
are, right.
definitely.
And so what you were talking about in regards to using wisdom, we certainly lack it there.
Hmm.
And if we had it, we would likely be able to give more responsibly to the nations around us. But a lot of what I think of in terms of how we're not using that wisdom is that, America is not a theocracy, obviously. Well, I would say it's a democracy, but yeah, I think we both know it's a republic. So some people don't quite understand the difference there, but that's a whole nother episode. Um, but those principles are certainly principles that we adhere to as Christians,
Yes.
as believers. But I would say that most of our leaders, many of our leaders, do not, and so it's hard to kind of champion those principles that others are maybe not even aware of, and
Mhm.
because I think at the bottom of what I heard you say, it's like it's not that we lack resources, it's like we lack faith and wisdom, and I would wholeheartedly agree with you on that. So, it's always the root problems that we tend to, like you said, put band-aids on.
Hmm.
But
Yes.
when you peel back the layers, it's never about finding solutions to these problems that are man-made. It's about reorienting our heart posture and
Hmm.
how do we actually address these in a way that makes lasting change.
Absolutely. I mean, when it comes to budgetary cuts in Washington, it's always the poor who are most affected. The money needed to ensure tax cuts for high income earners are rooted in the gutting of social safety net programs.
Hmm.
I mean, this is just time and time again with our budget. And something that I hear a lot is we like to call ourselves a Christian nation. We like to talk about our Judeo-Christian values. It's like, how can we call ourselves a Christian nation with Judeo-Christian values when our policies oppress the very people Jesus Christ calls us to serve and protect?
Mm,
And even if you're not a believer in Jesus, these are principles that transcend, his ministry. Um, they're supposed to connect us as human beings.
yeah.
There isn't supposed to be partiality,
Hmm.
between the rich man and the poor man. As they say, God is the maker of them all.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. When I have these conversations with people who are pointing to the very thing you're pointing to, which is this notion that we've abandoned, our mandate to care for others. I think about how, and for our listeners, this is a very theological episode, so I hope you're I hope you're enjoying learning a little bit more about the Christian viewpoint. But biblically, it was the church body that was meant to take care of the less fortunate and the poor. Even the tithes and offerings. It was you brought that to the storehouse, and then that was used to disperse to take care of the less fortunate.
Mm.
It was the ruling authorities that were the oppressors of
Hmm.
the people. And so I look at the parallel to where we are right now, and I can't help but understand that we're here because those people, us, the believers, have abandoned their mandate to take care of the less fortunate. And what we've done then is projected that mandate onto the government.
Mm.
And this is for me, this is at the heart of why government just doesn't quote unquote work. To work to do the things we want it to do because I truly believe it was never in the original blueprint, but we're trying to wrestle it into the original blueprint.
Mm.
Now, what would happen if believers actually rose up and and did the things they believe in?
Hmm.
The world would look a lot different. Back in the scriptural times, the word church was not used as we use it now. It was not a building, it was not an organization, it was a people.
Hmm.
And that word was ecclesia. And that word actually meant the governing body.
Mm.
So people were like, so wait, as a Christian, I was supposed to be governing something? Yeah, the earth.
Yes.
The earth. And so, because of a lot of things that have been done scripturally to change terminologies and change root meanings and Council of Nicaea and Constantine, and we can go on and on there, another episode. But now we have this word church that is an empty, hollow word,
Mm.
and we
Good.
don't recognize our our higher calling to
Mm.
take care of those around us. So I guess you could kind of tie that to why some people are not crazy about big government. And I would be more on that along that lines, but it's not this simple, easy thing like say no to big government. It's no, get your butt up off of your pew, out of your pew, and
Hmm.
go do the things that others are looking to the government to do because you're not doing them. Does that
Hmm.
make sense?
It totally does. And I think, I mean, I think you could tie that in with the church's relationship to like social justice.
Mm,
Um, it's especially could be around race. It
hmm.
could be around gender and sexuality. Um, you see some churches that go, I would say, too far to the left to make up for a
Mm,
lack in government,
mm,
whatever that lack is.
yeah.
And they're overemphasizing social justice, for instance, above the gospel.
Mm,
Because they feel like I have to make up for what our government is lacking.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I often talk about this in my podcast episodes that we are a swinging pendulum in
Mm,
society. We don't know balance. And so because we only know how to take the extreme positions on things, we're always overcorrecting.
mhm,
We are a society that has overcorrected for centuries and centuries and centuries. And it's this human tendency, it's ego-driven tendency to be the ones who are doing it right, rather than to find balance that is sustainable.
mm,
Yeah. It's sometimes when you zoom out and you look at the problems that we face, I would never say that they're easy, but they're simple. They all root from, our man-made tendencies towards ego and sin.
mhm,
And it's unfortunate because that's the hardest thing to correct
mm.
for because we don't see our own blind spots and we just want to win. We're a society of people who want to win.
That's the mentality we have here in America. Win.
Absolutely. Yeah,
We win at all costs. And we're able to
absolutely.
justify that because that's the only thing that matters.
Totally. I had a question I was going to ask you, and maybe we just answered it. So I'm going to ask it, and you tell me if we just answered it. And it was, what do you believe is at the root of our current division in America? What is at the root of our polarization?
That's a great question. And I addressed one being fear of lack. But I think
Mm-hmm.
there's also four other points. One being a lack of critical thinking.
Mm,
I believe we accept too many statements at face value, both politically and in the church, that reinforces how we already think. Um, there's a lack of discernment. We see deception through social media and from the pulpit, and not being able to sense when we are being deceived or manipulated because what we are being fed reinforces how we already feel.
hmm.
Speaks to how our algorithms are created to not challenge us,
Yeah.
but to satisfy our own desires. Um, I think this is one that's jumping out is unforgiveness.
Mm,
Uh, and when I think about unforgiveness, I think about specifically around race dating back to the Civil War.
mm,
Uh, I believe we are still dealing with unhealed wounds from the Civil War.
absolutely.
There have been simmering resentment at the outcome.
Mm,
This goes all the way back to when Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered his troops to General Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia in 1865.
mm,
Uh, I believe the spirit which cultivates racism and racial superiority was never uprooted.
mm,
We like to think that just because the Union won the Civil War, that we're all good, and we're not. We haven't been. Um, there was never any racial reconciliation between white slave owners and black slaves,
mm,
between Union and Confederate soldiers, and elected officials on both sides of the slavery aisle.
hmm.
One side won the war, and then that was it. We just ceased the discussion
Yeah.
at that point, as if like everything was better. This is all settled, and that led obviously to terrible atrocities
Hmm.
to black folks in the South in the late 1800s and into the 1900s. Uh, kind of circling back onto our previous point about winning, it's like to apologize is seen as a weakness in American culture. Uh, Two themes of the ministry of Jesus were repentance and forgiveness. This is something that he spoke about and preached about um, countless times.
Hmm.
And considering where we're at today, you know, I do believe that slavery is an outstanding sin sitting on the ledger of this nation, and that pride has blocked the opportunity to repent for the treatment of black slaves who provided free labor and laid the foundation for an economy, not of
Hmm.
their own free will.
Hmm.
You know, and this is free will that is in this world that is afforded by God to all who are created in his image. And that's black folks, brown folks, and white folks. We're all created in the image of God, and we are all equal in his eyes.
Hmm. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think this lastly, it's what I mean, this maybe goes back to 2020 or even maybe a little bit beyond or before that, but it's a failure to take ownership. You
Mm,
know, it's so common nowadays when a candidate loses in a general election, what's the first thing they do? It's they use election fraud as an
mm,
excuse for why they lost instead of acknowledging their own shortcomings.
mm.
This is such a damaging precedent for freedom that if you do not like the outcome of the race, then you are allowed to lie, coerce, and cheat your way to victory. It's just it goes back to that winning at all costs.
That is such a that there's the last two I want to touch on, but the very, very, very last one, I literally woke up with this on my mind this
Mm,
morning. Just this week, there is some new noise being made about this election from this past November.
mm,
And I know that there were some
mm,
suspicions from people regarding the results on this past November, but it seems that those suspicions have grown. And it made me think of something that I, again, always say on these podcast episodes, which is that when it comes to what we consider, let's use the term conspiracy theories, because that's
mhm,
kind of the umbrella that these things go under. Not that I'm labeling it that. I like to say that conspiracy theories are just people saying they don't trust somebody or something
mhm,
or some system.
mhm,
And there is a lot of distrust going around in the world today, in America today. And so when I saw this past week that same patterns resurfacing in the opposite direction, it just made
mhm,
me realize that everyone doesn't trust someone or something. And it's when it hits on the thing that means that matters to you
mhm.
that distrust surfaces. And it's neither here nor there what really took place, but I think it just points to an interesting thing of in human nature is that we're capable of the very same things that we often accuse others of doing when it touches something within us that makes us feel exposed, vulnerable, or uncomfortable. So I'm curious to know what you think about that.
I absolutely agree. Um, what's ironic is the far right and the far left have so much in common in this country, and they
It's
don't even
very
realize
true.
it. You can't get them in the room because otherwise, you know, they fight and claw at each other till
Yeah.
one side was totally gone. But it's like it's the same spirit, the same mindset. And then
Hmm.
you have just hodgepodge of people in between, in the middle, who vote sometimes to the right, they go sometimes to the left, kind of sways with um, whatever candidate is running for political office.
Hmm. Yeah.
That that is something that is so rarely acknowledged. It's like it's very easy to point to the far right. They have done violence. You know, that's fact. So has the far left. But it's also trying to think of like trying to think of this quote from some Star Wars episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. You have like the Sith bad guy, and he's talking to Anakin Skywalker, who's going to eventually become Darth Vader, and he looks at him and says like something along the lines of like evil is just a point of view, you know,
Mm,
or
mm.
like one man's freedom fighters is another man's terrorists. It's all about point of view, like you were just saying.
Yeah.
That's what it
Yeah.
comes down to. And
Very true.
we as humans, and I've done it,
Yeah.
we could justify just about anything we could possibly do. We could
Yeah.
find a way to justify it. We're
Absolutely.
really good at that.
You know, we
Hmm.
might place ourselves on this moral high ground, but when push comes to shove, we're all susceptible of, going to places in our own minds that we tell ourselves is okay, it's right. You know,
100%.
absolutely. So you are now running for office, and I don't think I know what position you're running for. Can you fill me and the listeners in?
Yes, currently I'm in the early stages of exploring a run for the United States Senate. This
Wow.
would be to represent the Republican Party in the 2026 midterm elections. And this is for the vacated seat of Democrat Dick Durbin. So it's a wide open race. Uh, I felt convicted to run for political office for 5 years.
Mm,
But up until now, after much prayer, I did not feel like this journey, I'd say, had God's favor on it. And
mm,
running for political office is difficult enough. And trying to do it in a season where you are not hearing a firm yes from God, um, to me, that will take the focus from relying on Him and putting the reliance on man to provide.
mm.
And, it takes a considerable amount of money and a considerable amount of resources nowadays to run and to win. And I want to be in a place to where I'm running a campaign and I'm relying on Him to provide, and I am not getting into the pockets of individuals who expect a return on their investment.
Mm. Yeah.
And we have enough of those folks in Washington. Not everybody. There's some folks. I'm not going to demonize, and it really bothers me when people kind of throw all elected officials in the same swamp.
Hmm.
They're not, there's some say rotten apples, but I think for the majority that the orchard isn't all that bad.
Yeah.
Um, so I need to be in a place where personally I know I'm in agreement with God in this season in my life
Hmm.
for me to move forward. And that's where I feel like I'm headed. Um, I'm going to continue to pray, as well as my wife is continuing to pray into this decision. But we do feel like we're feeling like it's the next election cycle, which would be 2026.
Yeah.
And Illinois offers a an excellent opportunity um, to run as a Republican, mainly to the dearth of votable or winnable candidates statewide. Um, we it's been a while since Republicans have put up a legitimate fight, and I don't think a Republican has won a Senate race. I want to say 2010, so I'm thinking 15 years. Traditionally, the Republican Party has stood for fiscal conservatism. They've been globally minded, um, foreign policy focused, and they carried Christian-like values. I believe we can move the party back to a less polarizing and divisive social club and back to the party of Abraham Lincoln.
Mm.
The Republican Party does not exist to serve one man, but the folks on the edges and the marginalized. You know, it's the base is the working class, it's middle America, it's farmers, it's folks who just want an opportunity to build a life and a family.
Yeah. Wow. So you answered about three of my questions in one, which I love. I was gonna wait for the punchline of, and what are you running as, Irvin? But you went right there, and I love it. Um, and I can tell that you have a real heart for rightness and
Mm,
for righteousness, and and that is likely what has driven you back into politics at this stage in your life.
yes.
Um, it's a sacrifice, right? It's definitely a sacrifice. And even as we look at what happened just this past weekend in Minnesota, you recognize that running for public office in many ways is, putting your life at stake. Do you have thoughts surrounding that?
Mm. Yeah, I mean that's a great point of reference. What happened in Minnesota this week? I trust God with my life, and that's where I'm at in my faith journey. Um, there's a cost. There's a cost to you're no longer anonymous.
Hmm.
There's something to it's something that I fought a lot in my life of not feeling like my voice was heard or feeling like I was invisible.
Hmm.
And you lose that when you're running for political office. You
Yes.
know, when I go for walks, I live, 2 minutes away from the lake, from Lake Michigan, from the beach. I really appreciate just how anonymous I am right now because I
Yes.
that's going to change
Hmm.
where I won't be able to go for those walks. And like you
Yes.
said, if, you know, God blesses me to the point where I am an elected United States Senator, I can't just, hop on the red line here in an elevated train and go to Wrigley Field.
Hmm.
Like it's just these little things. I can't just like go to the store whenever I want to.
Yeah.
It's like there's that cost um, to where your life, in a sense, is it's more restrictive, but it's a cost, and this is just it's a cost and a cause that I really am willing to give my life up for it
Mm.
because I see the path we're going down as a country, and just with my faith and just politically, like people have good hearts. We're not
Mm.
evil. We're not evil people. We're not deplorables. It's just
Hmm.
it's so easy to be led astray nowadays. And
Yeah.
I judge the spirit and not the person,
Mm.
because like I said, if I truly do believe that we're all created in the image of God, what do I think of God? God is good. God is truth. God is honest. And I believe that about people too. Sometimes you just gotta, take off some of the layers of the onion to get to the core, but we're all there. I believe in people. And it sounds cliched to say that I believe in people, but I truly do believe in the goodness that people carry in their hearts.
Mm. So good. We've we've lost that thing that makes us human,
Mm,
um, and our ability to humanize each other. And that is really the reason for this podcast. It's not even to get deep in the weeds of the issues, which are very important. But when we talk about issues, the important thing is never the issues. It's the people
mhm,
behind the issues
mhm,
and the people impacted by the issues. Um, and we've lost our ability to zoom out and take an aerial view at these things and kind of have more of the meta conversation about like the bigger picture. And I just desire to see us do that and to return to something that allows us then to enter back into the conversations from a different vantage point
mhm.
and one that's more graceful and humble.
I totally agree. I mean, we live in such a black and white world. It's like where you must choose a side and you stand by that side, no matter the heart or the work that
Yeah.
you've been sorted to.
Mhm.
And I mean, I think this mindset creates such pride in fighting new ideas and flexible thinking. And
Yes.
that if you agree with one out of 10 issues, it must mean that you agree with this entire ideology. And it's just, we're nuanced human beings. God didn't create us to be that flat.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, as you've gone through these different realignments in your life, and as you're now running, as a Republican, how has your faith been challenged throughout all of this? I know a lot of believers who've struggled with their faith as the world seems to be in such a state of chaos. I know many of them who have deconstructed. I know many who have left the faith. What has your experience been on your faith journey over these last, let's say, 5 years, maybe since COVID?
It's been hard. I mean, I think there have been times in which I felt theologically homeless. Um, personally, my wife and I, we have struggled to find a church home in Chicago and struggled overall to relate to the direction of the church in America. Uh, we've seen firsthand immature pastors, pastors driven by donors, controlling and structured services on Sunday morning, they get you in and out in 60 minutes. Like, all right, good,
Yes.
but then again, it's like they have a banner that says, we welcome Jesus into our service, or we welcome God, or you're gonna something to mention about Jesus and God, but you have like 7 minutes, God, to work within these
Yes.
people. So you
Been
gotta you
there.
gotta just ping pong, ping, ping, ping all across the room. You gotta get it done because we gotta move on to announcements.
Hmm.
Treating women as not equals. Um, that it's something called complementarian
Hmm.
theology or ideology. Excuse me if I'm misspeaking there, and putting the focus on buildings over the fostering of the Holy Spirit in prayer and church. It's like worship nights and prayer nights are free.
Yeah.
Those don't
Come
You don't
on.
have to raise $9 million to invite the presence of the Holy Spirit into your church. But,
Yeah.
you need to take up an offering, for God to come to your church. He'll come for free. You got to give him space. I mean, I personally grew up in the Catholic Church. I attended Catholic grammar school pre through eight. I went to an all boys Catholic high school. We never opened up our Bible once, and I
Mm,
had no personal relationship with Jesus. Uh, my my idea of Jesus came from in every good Catholic family in the South Side of Chicago. Everybody has a picture of Jesus in their homes,
yes.
and my grandparents had a picture of Jesus, and for some reason they put Jesus at the bottom of the stairs in the basement. Don't ask me why. And it was a dark basement. And every time we go for family holidays, my dad would be like, "Hey, you could get me a Pepsi. I'm gonna go downstairs." I see this stern-faced Jesus just staring at me. And that was the Jesus that I knew. It
Hmm.
was he's staring at me, and I'm a sinner. He sees me, and not he see me in a good way. He sees when I'm doing bad.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it was a judgmental Jesus, and
Hmm.
that's what I carried for a very long time. I eventually strayed away from the church myself. Came back around the time that I met my wife in May of 2018. That was a diversion to my response here. We've recently started attending a local Anglican church.
Mm.
Um, we really appreciate how Anglicans honor the Eucharist. Um, it is more liturgical, so you get that kind of Catholic-y background, and there's some charismatic aspects to it. So we, my wife and I we've made decisions in the past where we've jumped into churches too soon. We get
Hmm.
a first couple weeks, we have a really good discussion with the pastor. We think we're in alignment, and then next thing you know, 6 to 9 months down the road, we're finding out that they don't want women to preach, and that
Mm.
women just need to go have kids, need to go off in the kids ministry, and then the men make the decisions.
Hmm.
Little things like that. It's just like, and so we're taking it slow, which is, it could be challenging for people to understand that process. We've been burned so many times,
Yeah.
relationship wise, burned by pastors, that it's a miracle that you take our story on a lot of other folks and they stop going to church. And I
Hmm.
don't I don't judge those folks for not going anymore. I don't judge them at
Hmm.
all.
Yeah. I share such a similar journey with church hurt. I've been a part of countless churches at this point. Church is the place, like you said, it's the easiest place to be hurt because it's a place that you
Mhm.
have the highest expectations. And
Yes.
it's also the place that you become the most vulnerable because you feel that you should be able to.
Yes.
So those cuts, because your heart is already open, when the cut comes, it cuts straight to the heart. It doesn't have to
Mm,
go through all the layers because you've exposed yourself.
mm,
And I've definitely had to work my way through a lot of that healing. And I'm so grateful because that process of being hurt and working towards healing and recovery, it it brings you back to the true heart of God. It's
mm,
like it reorients who you're putting your trust in.
mm.
It reorients what the heart of God really is, and so
Yeah.
that you can now juxtapose that with the artificial, and you know what's real.
Yes.
And so it's been a beautiful journey, and I'm really so grateful that that God is good even when people aren't. Right? So good. So, being that you've just kind of shared a little bit more about what you've been through, especially in the religious circles and church circles, and we've talked a lot about your politics, I'm curious to know what are some assumptions or judgments that people make about you? You're a Christian, but you have progressive views, but you're running as a Republican. Like, I'm sure people have all sorts of opinions about you.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's kind of caused me to be at times politically and theologically homeless. Um, but I think what some assumptions or judgments when they hear that I'm a Republican is that I'm completely aligned with the current administration in Washington, um, that I agree with the current policies on, I would say I'm in total alignment with their current policies on immigration enforcement. We spoke about Israel and Palestine, the Second Amendment, tax cuts for the ultra wealthy earners, and that I don't care about human rights or the dignity of a human being.
Mm,
Um, I think that is there's such a stigma, especially here in Chicago, about calling yourself a Republican.
mm,
Because we spoke about living in such a black and white world
mhm,
that there isn't that opportunity, and that's what I need to carve out is
mhm,
to be a nuanced Republican, just so you could be a nuanced Democrat. Like just because you're a Democrat doesn't mean that you agree with, this, that, and the other, far left policy. It's just my focus in running for office is to best connect with people. And that's in person. That's doing town halls. That's I just don't want to be that candidate that just blows up your phone with texts. Click this link, give me money. I don't want to be that candidate that blows up your inbox. I don't want to be that candidate that wants to divide or polarize you more. I want to go out in Illinois to state fairs, to conferences, to street corners and one stoplight towns. And I
mm,
want to meet people and I want to learn what's important to them. Only by doing that can I be a candidate that truly represents the people. You know, I mean, Chicago and Illinois are basically two different states, but it doesn't mean that poor black folks and poor white folks aren't dealing with the same issues. They're told that they're two completely different people, and they're told that the other side is what's wrong with America. That's
mhm,
false. It's a
mm.
lie that we must rebuke and cast off. I think that's why I'm appreciative of opportunities like this on your podcast, is I can do my best to head off any assumptions or judgments that are going to be made about me just because I have the word Republican attached to me. Like I'm going to need to go out and prove to people that my politics is different than what they've heard before, and that my background in working with migrants and refugees and immigrants, lower income folks, the marginalized. I've worked with the people who are directly affected by the policies that are enabled in Washington.
Mhm.
And they need to know that they're not always going to have a seat at the table, but they're going to have somebody representing their um, own best interests at the table. Uh, I just looked at the name of your podcast. So actually, speaking of table, but yeah, hey, hey,
Yes, absolutely. That's why we call it the Set the Table podcast. Beautiful. Well, I mean, what gives you hope right now? Like honest hope, not generic optimism, but honest hope about the world we're living in.
change is built on hope. I believe in finding common ground, not burning bridges or holding grudges. I believe that little victories lead to bigger ones once trust has been established. Got to establish trust. Um, we're not the enemy. As a Republican, Democrats are not my enemy. Folks within the Republican Party who I'm not in total alignment with are not my enemy. And I'm going to walk in with that mindset. I don't care who I have to work with. I'll work with a Republican. I'll work with a Democrat. I'll work with an independent. I don't care. What matters most is that we are pushing legislation that benefits the people of the state of Illinois and consequently, states, in America. I mean, personally, I do believe we're heading toward an inflection point in our nation where we are likely to see something so shocking that it will wake up the church and consequently Washington. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the domino effect. It has to wake up the church first,
Mm,
and then it will affect Washington. I don't know exactly what that will be or what it will look like, but that is the path we're headed down as a country. Um, Fear is exhausting.
mm,
Control requires constant effort. And at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, do we really want to live in a nation that is never at peace with each other? And what gives me hope is that we have a big God on our side to partner with. And that's good enough for me to move forward with the faith needed to serve the citizens of Illinois and Washington. My political foundation is rooted in hope, and my theological foundation is rooted in faith. And that's what I carry.
mm, hmm. One question I have for you is, you talk about working with people on either side, which is what we need to be able to do. So, if you could sit down with someone who you disagree with them, they totally disagree with you,
Hmm.
what would you want to understand about them?
A good question. In this moment, I cannot think of one specific question.
Hmm.
I wish more people would listen.
Hmm.
Listen to personal stories, listen to feelings, listen so the other person can feel heard.
Yeah.
Listening creates a heart connection, and it's the heart connection that breaks down the barriers to compassion and empathy and understanding.
Hmm. Yeah, that's simple. You said it all. We are often hearing, but never listening.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
absolutely. And that's why we talk past each other. So, well, we are rounding our time out. This has been such a pleasure. There's been a lot of depth to our conversation today, and it gives me a lot of hope that we can really get into these more nuanced conversations
Mm,
and leave with new perspectives. That we don't always have to come into a conversation with our mindset,
mm,
set in stone. Doesn't mean we're going to change our heart, our core beliefs, but being able to absorb someone else's processing is
mm.
very important. And I feel that that's what this has been today. So I definitely thank you. My takeaway question is if there's one thing that you hope people take away from hearing your perspective today, what is it?
Ooh, that's a good one. I gotta say that I feel like many elected officials think the people of this country exist to provide them with position and financial power. And I think their position in Washington as an elected official exists to provide our people with opportunities, solutions, freedom, equality, and human rights. And your next senator of Illinois should make sure you have it. You know, Change is rooted in hope.
Mm,
I think it's vitally important to not let yourself be numb to suffering and the loss of human life. It's so easy to turn away from the truth. We have avoided facing because it makes us feel uncomfortable.
mhm,
And this is probably a line from a movie, but it's like evil thrives when we sleep. It's fact.
mhm,
Jesus faced the difficult head on, and I believe the gospel demands us to do so as well. And the dignity of human beings, it's white, black, and brown, demands us to do as well.
Hmm.
We've got to face the difficult. Can't run away from it. It's the only way change is going to happen.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ervin. Thank you for your honesty, your nuance, your willingness to bring both your conviction and your curiosity to the table. Conversations like this, they remind us that we don't have to sacrifice depth for civility or courage for compassion.
Thank you, Peace, for having me on. I really enjoyed this back and forth. I really love the opportunity to support your mission and what you're doing and bringing together these difficult conversations and just giving people space to be able to share. I think what you're doing is invaluable, and I look forward to continue to support your mission.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So to our listeners, thank you again for joining us for another episode of the Set the Table podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have. And hey, as always, let's keep setting the table for a healthier, more whole society. We'll see you next time.